Well, hello lovely humans, and welcome back to my channel. Before we launch into the video, I get a ton of questions about these lamps. Like all the time, in almost every single video, somebody asks where these lamps are from. Oh, and now I realize that I'm crooked. Cool. If you've been around for a while, you know that I made these. I have a whole DIY over on my personal channel. I'm gonna go ahead and link it up here. Those are actual real life plants in there, and they are the funnest lamps I've ever seen in my life. But enough about that. In this week's video, we are going to be talking about 9 tips for the perfect summer wedding. Now, I don't know where you guys are in the world, but here in Southern California, things are starting to heat up just a teensy tiny little bit, and it's starting to get real hot out there. And it got me thinking, I don't think I've ever done a specific summer wedding tip video. So I put together 9 tips to make sure you have the perfect summer wedding. So without further ado, let's just jump right on into it. Now, a lot of these may sound painfully obvious, okay? I'm aware of that. But sometimes even the most detail-oriented of persons forget the obvious details, so it's still worth going through each and every one of them. Tip number 1, think about your guests' comfort. That could mean having something like sunscreen or bug spray on him for them to apply, just so you know they don't burn in the sun or get eaten alive. Another thing you can do is pass out handheld fans, whether that be like one of those beautiful little accordion folding fans, or turning your program into a fan with like a Home Depot paint stick. You know what I'm talking about, you've probably seen them on Pinterest before, but I've been to enough warm weddings with people fanning themselves with their clutches or with their hands to know that every once in a while these things definitely come in handy. It's a twofer, you know, you can show your program and you can keep your guests cool at the same time. Now, one thing to keep in mind with the umbrella idea is sometimes photography-wise they can be very obtrusive. So if you're passing out umbrellas or parasols during your ceremony, it's not gonna be that quintessential wide shot of all the back of your guests' heads. It's going to be a sea of umbrellas. So if you are the type of person that doesn't like that kind of thing, maybe don't opt for passing those out. Or if you're going to, try to have them be matching or a certain color palette instead of black, blue, red, white, whatever the colors happen to be. It is really nice if they are more of the same color. Obviously, yes, that comes with a higher price tag, but if those photos or that look is worth it to you, it's something to keep in mind. The second thing you're gonna wanna consider is drinks. Yes, obviously you're gonna wanna have drinks. But here's something that's super interesting about summer weddings. People will opt for white wine and cold beer over red wine by a much larger percentage. When it's hot outside, you want something nice and cold and refreshing to drink. So when you're calculating your percentages, keep the temperature in mind of where your wedding's going to be or what time of year it's gonna happen, because more people are gonna opt for white wines and beers instead of red wines and or hard, heavy alcohols. If you are doing a mixed drink like a margarita, it's gonna be a smashing hit, because who doesn't want a nice, decent marg when it's like 100 degrees outside? I don't know. I certainly do. But they're more likely gonna opt for those refreshing kind of beverages than they would potentially a red wine or something like whiskey. You are also going to want to have plenty of water, and I mean plenty of water. We have had several warm summer events where we thought we purchased more than enough water and ran out. You can always pre-buy water in the gallon jugs, and if you have any left over afterwards, it's perfectly fine. You can either keep it in your home and drink it, or if the store that you purchased it from allows returns, take it back afterwards. Buying gallons of water is not that expensive. You guys know that. Just make sure you buy more than enough. And lastly, for drinks, make sure you have like a ton of ice. And I mean a ton of ice. There are ice calculators out there that can help you kind of figure out a general number, but if you can get a live human on the phone, that would be a great call, whether you're ordering from a place like Bevmo or you're ordering from a place like here in the Temecula area. We have a company called the Ice Taxi that will actually deliver ice for your event. And those kinds of companies are really good at helping you figure out how much ice you need, because obviously you'll need more if you are storing stuff in coolers instead of a refrigerator. You'll need more if you have multiple drink dispensers sitting out than you would if you're just adding it to mixed drinks. I know this is super obvious, but ice melts very quickly. And if your guests are going to be going for a cooler beverage, they're going to want it to be cool. I think I said the last thing for the last one, but this is actually the last thing. Make sure you have enough bartenders. This one sounds a little bit random, but if it's really warm outside, your guests are going to be running to the bar for something cold to drink. And you don't want it to be one bartender for 100 people. That means your guests are waiting around for a very long time for something refreshing. Secondary to that, I would say have a drink dispenser table with cool beverages that guests can serve themselves. Water, iced tea, and lemonade. Those are super easy to manage and refill and keep an eye on. Keep it pretty close to the bartender so they can jump on over and fill that up as needed. Insider tip for this one, if you buy gallon jugs of water and get powder mixes for both lemonade and iced tea, you can actually mix it directly into that gallon of water, and it can be shooken up really easily and then poured in, instead of buying a specific kind of tea and a specific kind of lemonade that may need to be refrigerated. With the water, you can keep it stored underneath that dispenser table. It can be mixed really quickly and then poured right on in. Is it the nicest tea and the nicest lemonade you've ever had in your life? No, but will people care when it's 98 degrees outside and 70% humidity? No, they will not. They just want something cold and refreshing, and they want it as quickly as possible. The third thing to consider with a summer wedding is shade and or air conditioning. I know we touched on it a little bit with the guest comfort, but this goes beyond just your guests. Even if you have your ceremony inside and your cocktail hour outside, you still need to make sure that there's plenty of shade. You might also consider renting large party fans. From what I understand, now I've never been to a wedding that actually rents these, but from what I understand, they actually can be quite quiet and they're not that obtrusive and or loud, but that gentle airflow can really help to keep people comfortable. We had an event once, it was actually kind of basically in fall, but here in Southern California, that's basically just still means hot. And it was so warm that guests actually clustered close to the buildings to stay out of the sunlight. There were no umbrellas, there was no shade offerings whatsoever. So instead of everyone mingling together and wandering around, they were all glued like wallflowers to the side of this building because they didn't want to stand in the sun. So that's absolutely something to keep in mind. If any section of your event is going to be exposed to direct sunlight, you will need to consider bringing in shade or offering some sort of shade. Otherwise, your guests are going to be glued to those shady spots, basically counting the minutes until your reception begins so they can move to another location. Hopefully shaded this time. This also, of course, affects you. When taking photos, your photographer is probably gonna go out of his or her way to find a nice shady location to take the photos. One, because obviously it's gonna be way more comfortable if it's blazing hot outside, and two, it actually makes for better photos. The fourth thing to consider would be your flowers. You do not want to pick a flower that will wilt very, very quickly. Your florist should definitely walk you through this and say this variety will work great, this variety will not work great. For example, sweet peas, not a good idea in direct sun. Second example, hydrangeas. Hydrangeas like to be hydrated, so they may not be a good call with a lot of events. You'll also need to be very clear with your florist if these flowers are going to be in direct sunlight. Because no matter what, at a certain point in time, all of your flowers are going to start to basically poop out on you if they've been sitting in direct sun for 6 hours. This could affect his or her setup time frame. They may come a little bit closer to the reception to place them out. They don't wilt in the sun. You're gonna wanna talk through all of those time frames with your florist. The last thing you might wanna consider with florals is not repurposing them. I'm a huge fan of repurposing flowers. I love it when people can take their arch or arbor piece and then plunk it down on their sweetheart table, because then one floral arrangement covers 2 locations. The likelihood of that being successful though on a warm summer day really plummets because the flowers, again, can't be exposed to too much heat or too much sun for too long. Tip number 5, timeline. Timeline is going to be very important. Timelines are important in general. Y'all know I'm crazy and I love a good timeline and I love a smooth timeline and I love an on-time timeline. But it's even more important when you're exposing guests to uncomfortable situations like high heat, high humidity, and or direct sun. If you have no other choice and your ceremony does need to be in a direct sunlight location, keep it brief. Like, keep it as quick as possible, because if your guests are sitting through a 45-minute ceremony in direct sunlight, they're going to be miserable. And miserable guests don't stay the whole time. Miserable guests go home. If they're uncomfortable getting sunburned or getting eaten alive by mosquitoes, they're not gonna wanna hang out for much longer. And you've paid a lot of money for them to be there so they can celebrate and party with you. This also could mean not starting your event at noon, 1 o'clock, or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. That is when the sun is at its highest and therefore the warmest. It's not comfortable and people are truly miserable. So if you are having a summer event, consider starting at 4 o'clock or 4:30. You can still get a wonderfully full day out of it, but you're not exposing yourself and your guests to the midday sun. Another timeline detail to consider would be if you are having a first look, again, referring back to the shaded thing, make sure it is happening in a shaded location, but also try to work into the timeline a little bit later in the day, perhaps sunset photos when it's a little bit cooler, so your photographer doesn't have to keep you out in the hot, hot heat early in the day, but can take you out a little bit later when it's cooler and more comfortable. Tip number 6. Food. In my professional opinion and in my experience, it is in your best interest to not serve anything that is too heavy on a hot summer day. Keep your fares light and refreshing. This is a great opportunity to go for seasonal items and or seasonal dishes. If you have the choice between a soup or a salad, definitely don't choose the soup. People are already hot. They don't want to eat something hot. They want to eat something nice and cool. It is also worth discussing this with your caterer to make sure that none of your food could melt and or wilt in a more oppressive heat. So while a green salad may sound like a great idea, it won't do well if it's sitting out in the heat for too long. So it could mean your caterer is bringing it out at the very last minute, or you opt for something non-wiltable instead. Is that a word? Avoid things like creams and cheeses, because again, milk in heat, not a great call. So definitely choose something lighter and more fresh. Not only will that be something that your guests gravitate towards, it will also fare a lot better and will not melt, wilt, or look gross by the time people start eating it. Number 7, attire. Not just for you and your spouse-to-be, but for the entire bridal party. You're going to want something that is more loose-fitting. Now, if your dream dress has a fitted bodice and a fitted skirt, that is a-okay. Just understand that you will be way more warm on your wedding day if you have something that clings to your body. I know I'm overstating the obvious here, but that's how sweat happens, and it's going to be extremely, extremely uncomfortable. For any of the dudes in your bridal party, you're going to want to avoid black suits and or tuxedos, and you're definitely gonna wanna avoid 3 pieces. So that is the pants, the jacket, and a vest. You're just adding on more and more layers. Those guys are gonna be so uncomfortable and so sweaty and probably not look great for photos. For any gals that are in your bridal party, again, try to avoid anything that's too form-fitting throughout the body. Go for something loose and gauzy. In addition to that, go for something that's light colored. A pale blue, a pale pink, a pale cream, a pale insert word here. You're definitely gonna want to avoid a black bridesmaid's dress in direct sunlight. It just gets kind of miserable. And lastly, for your attire with a summer wedding, you may want to avoid a train and or a long veil. Not only is that more fabric that's just kind of bulky and heavy to carry around, which could potentially increase all the sweat that's happening, but if your ceremony is outside, your long train and or your veil could get caught. I have had a bride's train and veil actually get caught in a planter because it was so long that I had to like crouch and walk behind her. I'm sure, I mean, everybody saw me. I wasn't that subtle, but the poor thing, her veil was obviously attached to her head and got caught and like yanked her back. So just something to keep in mind. Not only is it extra weight and it's extra warm, which you don't want and or need when it's already hot outside, but it could easily get caught on something outdoors. Tip number 8, hair and makeup. It almost goes without saying that you're gonna wanna pick something that's long lasting. If you are a person that's prone to sweating your makeup off, definitely have that conversation with your makeup artist ahead of time and definitely make sure that he or she knows that during your makeup trial. So that way, ideally, they can provide you with makeup that's long lasting and won't slide off your face. For hair, curls tend to get kind of frizzy in the humidity and the heat. I know that because I have naturally wavy hair that goes a bit nutso when it's the slightest bit humid outside, like the teensiest, tiniest bit, and all of a sudden I feel like I'm Monica in the Bahamas, right? They were in the Bahamas when that happened. Like, so this is the time to make sure you are using all the right products to combat that frizz. You also might want to consider a full updo, like get all of the hair off of your neck and away from your face. You can have a couple loose tendrils, things like that. But if it's going to be a warm day outside, the likelihood of your hair lasting wonderfully throughout the entire day, if it's fully down, gets a little bit slimmer. So that would be both for you and for any women that are in your bridal party. If they can get it out of their face and up off the back of their neck, they will thank you. Because if you want hair that's down and things get humid and or sweaty, there's a high likelihood that it's not gonna maintain its look throughout the entire night. And then lastly, I would say it's probably a good idea to skip any sort of hair floral pin, like with real flowers. Flowers need a water source to maintain looking fresh and clean, and any sort of hairpin or hair clip with real flowers in it will not have any sort of water source. So they may look cute for first look or for photos beforehand, but by the time your ceremony's over, they're probably gonna be looking a little less cute or a lot less cute. So on a nice hot summer day, skip the flowers in your hair or opt for faux flowers instead. And then last but not least, tip number 9, think about your desserts. We actually had a couple bring in a popsicle vendor during cocktail hour because they knew that their day was gonna be pretty warm. It was such a hit, you guys. All of them were completely gone by the time cocktail hour was over. So although it wasn't the typical dessert time, it was still a very, very smart move on this couple's part to make sure that they're providing something nice and refreshing. So when thinking about desserts, perhaps consider something fun like popsicles or maybe an ice cream truck. As long as they can stay cool and frozen, your guests will so appreciate the nice, refreshing treat. Now, if you still want to opt for a more traditional style dessert, such as a cake or cupcakes, there are 2 things that I'd love for you to keep in mind. 1, buttercream is named thusly thusly a word? Sure. Is named thusly because it's made of butter. And butter melts when it gets hot and or when it's in direct sunlight. So if you have your heart set on a buttercream frosted cake and or cupcakes, you might want to make sure that your baker and or caterer knows that you are okay with or encourage them keeping all of your desserts in a cool location and bringing them out at the last minute. We have seen cakes melt before. We had one event where I mean, technically it wasn't a professional baker who made the cake, and set it up really early next to a window, and it started to slide, like actually slide off of itself. That was crazy, and it might be one of my least favorite wedding moments ever because I was like, oh my gosh, their cake! No! And in addition to wanting to keep them inside because it's cooler, you may also want to keep them inside for as long as possible because bugs. Bugs love themselves some sugar, and then they'll get caught in the frosting. I know, it sounds gross. It totally does, because it is. So if you are having a dessert outside, you may want to keep it inside for as long as possible, or consider some sort of covering. I've seen beautiful mosquito nets draped around a cake and then removed when it's time to cut it, just to kind of protect it just a teensy bit more. So that's all we have for today, folks. Thank you so much for stopping by. Hopefully this gave you some ideas for a summer wedding, because it's hot, but that doesn't mean that it can't be absolutely enjoyable and absolutely gorgeous. If you haven't done so already, like this video because you liked the video, and subscribe to this channel for more tips and tricks for the modern day bride. Additionally, if you're looking to binge some more content over here on the YouTube, jump on over to my second channel. I'll link it right here. I think I usually have it in my end screen right about here, right? Cool. And come hang out with me on my lifestyle channel. Okay, cool. Until next week. Bye, guys.